On this day, I want to offer you some thoughts on jealousy, storms, and grace. But before I do, we all know the context of these days, and Rita was reminding me of a lot of pieces as she was reading her Facebook page, and I hope she doesn't mind me mentioning that. She's way more connected than me. I'm the introvert in the house, and you all know that, so she'll say, "Have you seen this on Facebook?" And I'll say, "No, I haven't been on." That's me. And one of the things she reminded me of is the history of our church and of our confessions in standing up against hatred and violence and racism and wrongdoing. And one of the suggestions was to put up this banner. That's the banner that represents the Declaration of the Barmen. In the 1930s, a group of German pastors gathered in the face of Nazism and said, "No, enough." It would seem that's where we are. Enough. So in that context, I offer you some thoughts about jealousy and storms and grace in our readings. Jealousy is an ugly thing, one of the worst. I used to think pride was the absolute worst of all the things that could grab our souls and tear us apart and destroy our world, but I'm beginning to think it might be jealousy. Because the actions of the last few days are not rooted in pride, they're rooted in jealousy. Jealousy is defined, if you look it up, as fearful of being supplanted or replaced. Seems to fit, huh? Apprehensive of loss of position. Those are the first two definitions in the dictionary, in the big dictionary I keep in my office. It is intolerant of disloyalty of any kind, and that means disloyalty to the status quo. And it will do all it can to protect its position. We have before us today a reading from Genesis, a reading about jealousy and how it can grow. Jealousy comes in the family of Jacob among his sons. He's got 12 of them, so there's lots of opportunity for jealousy. And they are jealous of Joseph. Joseph, whose dreams we skip, and it helps if we would know those dreams. In those dreams, Joseph has these dreams that his brothers are all going to be bowing down to him. And that certainly threatens them. That certainly raises that possibility that these older brothers who thought they would be over their younger brother Joseph are at risk of being replaced and supplanted and losing their position and their privilege. That's where they are. And so when their father gives him a long coat with long sleeves, the old translation was a coat of many colors. We've learned more Hebrew since then. We've seen older manuscripts that give us newer translations. Does that sentence make sense to you? It's a royal robe. And Joseph is probably enjoying it a little too much. And his brothers become more jealous and more angry. And it is difficult among the brothers, as you can imagine. Jealousy is growing. The seeds have been planted. The difficulties are there. We know about that. Jealousy, that fear of losing your privilege, is a dangerous thing. It is not a healthy thing, and it is not an acceptable thing, and it is not a right thing. That fear of losing your position and privilege. And we've seen the destruction that that can do in our world. We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in South Africa. We've seen it in tribal conflicts. We've seen it all around the world. Jealousy knows no boundary. It knows no particular race or class or privilege. Well, it does actually know privilege. The people who are privileged are usually the ones who are the most jealous to protect their privilege. We're seeing it today in white nationalism. We should probably call it what it is. It's racism. It is. It is an attempt to protect privilege. And it's making a mess. Then comes the storm. Storms happen when you feed jealousy. When you feed it. It happens in the brothers when they sit around talking about it. Who does that Joseph think he is with those dreams? Who does he think he is wearing that coat with those long sleeves? Who does he think he is? Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him. That's a storm. An awful storm. Now, there are those who try to mitigate it a little bit, like Reuben, but he loses sight of what's really going on, and I'm still not sure he was even trying to mitigate it, is work it for his own advantage. He was going to put his brother in the pit. Then when his other brothers were gone, he was going to take his brother and be the rescuer. That's one way to read it. Work it for my own privilege and position. But instead, they sell him into slavery. Heard that story, haven't we? All around the world, even today. Take economic advantage of the less privileged. Keep them down. And when they stand up, when people who are oppressed stand up to the jealousy that's been fed by angry, bitter voices, the storms rage and rage and rage. And violence comes. Now on Monday, before all of this happened, I listened to a podcast, and Matt Skinner, one of the commentators on the podcast, said, "Oh, you know this story about Jacob? It's on the wall at the Lorraine Motel." Do you know recognize the name of the Lorraine Motel? The Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, room 306 and 305 on the balcony is where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And outside that room is a white wreath and this quote. "They said to one another, 'Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams.'" We've been there. We repeat it over and over and over. But then comes the grace. The grace is that the dream can't be killed. If you know the rest of the Joseph story, the dream lives. If you know the story of Jesus, he is raised. If you know the story of Nazism, it is defeated. If you know the story of Nelson Mandela, you know that things get turned around. If you know the story of Martin Luther King Jr., you know that we're still struggling with the dream. But we're in the storm. And the grace is that Jesus is there with us. Jesus is there reaching out his hands, holding us, encouraging us, challenging us to get out of the boat. To be brave. To keep working for the dream. That's the grace. Jesus is with us. That's the grace. The grace is the peaceful protesters. The grace is the people like the story of White Flower that some of us heard from David Lamotte when he was here. The story is all of the people who continue to stand up and say, no, enough, no more. Not with violence, but with peace. But with peace doesn't mean with weakness. It means with incredible, powerful strength and conviction. That's our grace. The dream still lives. And we still stand with all of those who are threatened in our society by jealousy and anger. We still stand with people of color, and one of the things that we will pray in a few moments from the Disaster Assistance Organization is that we listen to one another carefully. We're not the normal congregation. We have an opportunity to hear one another's stories and then to be strengthened to stand all the more firmly. Let us stand together. Would you please pray with me? I didn't mean literally. Our loving and gracious God, fill us with hope that comes from the power of your Spirit. Fill our minds with dreams for the world you desire. Fill us with courage to stand up against injustice. And save us from hatred and violence and jealousy and anger in ourselves and others. Amen.